They told me blood was thicker than water, but they forgot to mention that blood can also drown you. I lost my home, my father's love, and my identity because I chose the truth over a lie. For 2 years, I was the villain in my family's story, until 5 other voices decided it was time to stop whispering. I remember the exact weight of the air in my father's study the night I told him. It was heavy, smelling of old leather and the expensive cigars he only lit when he was feeling particularly powerful. He didn't look up from his ledger at first. He just sat there, the king of his small, pristine empire, while I stood by the door, trembling with a secret that was burning a hole through my conscience. "Lily Rose," he said, his voice like grinding gravel. "You're hovering, it's distracting." I took a breath. My sister Sarah had always been the golden child. She was the one who followed the rules, the one who won the trophies, and the one who carried the family's reputation like a crown. But I had seen what was behind that crown. I had seen the way she manipulated the accounts of a local charity she managed. I had seen the people she hurt, the funds that went missing, and the calculated way she silenced anyone who noticed. "Dad," I whispered, stepping into the light. "Sarah isn't who you think she is. I have the bank statements. I have the emails. She's been stealing, Dad. Not just a little. She's ruining people." The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was a cold, sharp blade. My father slowly looked up, his eyes narrowing until they were just 2 icy slits. He didn't ask for the evidence. He didn't ask for an explanation. He simply stood up, walked over to the fireplace, and pointed at the door. "You would betray your own sister?" he asked, his voice dangerously low. "You would bring shame to this name for the sake of some misplaced sense of morality? If you walk out that door to report this, Lily Rose, you are no longer my daughter. You will leave with nothing but the clothes on your back. No inheritance, no family, and no home." I looked at him, searching for a flicker of the man who used to read me bedtime stories. There was nothing left but pride. I realized then that to him, the image of a perfect family was worth more than the reality of a broken one. I didn't cry, not then. I just turned around and walked out. The next 2 years were a blur of cheap motels, double shifts at a diner, and a crushing sense of isolation. I watched from a distance as my family's social media remained perfect. Sarah got promoted. My father hosted lavish galas. I was the ghost, the bitter daughter who had supposedly suffered a mental breakdown and fled. But truth has a funny way of being patient. It sits in the dark, waiting for the light to hit it just right. I thought I was alone in my exile. I thought I was the only one who knew the weight of Sarah's shadows. Then on a Tuesday morning, exactly 2 years to the day after I was disowned, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. "Is this Lily Rose?" The woman's voice was shaky, terrified. "I worked with your sister at the foundation. I thought I was the only one, until I found the others." My heart stopped. The woman on the phone introduced herself as Elena. She had been a junior accountant at the foundation, the kind of person my sister usually looked right through. But Elena wasn't just calling to vent. She was calling because she had found the cracks I couldn't reach. "Lily," she whispered, "I found the others. 4 of them. Women who were fired, silenced, or threatened when they tried to speak up about the discrepancies Sarah was creating. We saw your father's statement years ago about you leaving. We knew it was a lie. We knew you were the first one she tried to break." Hearing those words felt like a physical weight lifting off my chest. For 2 years, I had lived in a world where I was the crazy one. I had started to doubt my own memories, wondering if I had imagined the coldness in Sarah's eyes. But I wasn't alone. I was just the first domino. I met them in a cramped back room of a library 3 towns over. It was a secret meeting of the broken. There was Elena, the accountant, Marcus, an elderly donor who had been scammed out of his life savings, and 3 others who had worked in various departments under my sister's iron thumb. As we sat in that circle, the stories began to spill out. It wasn't just about the money anymore. Sarah had a system. She would find people with no leverage, immigrants, the elderly, or young graduates, and use their signatures to bypass audits. If they questioned her, she used our father's name and legal team to crush them before they could even hire a lawyer. She told me if I went to the police, She'd make sure I never worked in this state again, one girl, barely 21, said through tears. She said the Rose family owned the police. I felt a hot, bubbling rage rising in my throat. My father hadn't just protected her. He had provided the fortress she used to hide her victims. He had traded my life for a reputation built on the bones of people who had nothing. "We have enough now," Elena said, sliding a thick manila folder across the table toward me. "But we need a face. We need someone the press won't ignore. We need a Rose to take down a Rose." I looked at the folder. It was filled with forged signatures, wire transfer receipts, and recorded conversations that Sarah thought were private. It was a ticking time bomb. "If I do this," I said, my voice finally steady, "there is no going back. My father will use every cent he has to bury us." "He can try," Marcus added, his old eyes sparking with fire. "But he can't bury the truth when it's screaming from 6 different directions." That night I didn't go back to my apartment. I drove to the outskirts of my childhood estate. I sat in the looking at the glowing windows of the mansion where I grew up. I could see the silhouette of my father in his study, probably still convinced he had won. He thought he had cut me off from the world. He didn't realize he had just sent me out to find an army. I pulled out my laptop and began drafting the first email. I didn't send it to the police. Not yet. I sent it to the one investigative journalist my father had spent a decade trying to bribe. Subject: The Rose Foundation, The Cost of Silence. I attached the first file, the one with my father's own signature on a document that authorized the liquidation of a whistleblower's pension. The war hadn't just started. It was already over. They just didn't know it yet. The response from the journalist, a man named Elias Thorne, came at 3 a.m. It was only 3 words. "Tell me everything." For the next week, my life became a blur of encrypted messages and midnight meetings. Elias was a predator in a suit, and Sarah was the prey he'd been waiting for his entire career. But he was smart. He knew that one disgruntled daughter wasn't enough to topple the Rose Empire. He needed the 5. I spent those days acting as the bridge. I convinced the others to step out of the shadows. It wasn't easy. They were terrified. They knew my father's reach. They knew that the Rose family didn't just have money. They had influence in the pockets of judges and the ears of the city council. "Lily," Elena asked me one evening as we sat in a dimly lit diner, "what happens to you after this? If we win, your family name is dragged through the mud. You'll be the woman who destroyed her own father." I looked at my reflection in the dark coffee. My face looked thinner than it had 2 years ago, but my eyes were harder. "I'm not destroying my father, Elena. He destroyed himself the second he chose a lie over his daughter. I'm just the one turning on the lights." The pressure was mounting. Sarah must have sensed something was wrong, because the cease and desist letters started arriving at the door of everyone I had met with. My father's legal team was working overtime, trying to scare the witnesses back into silence. Then came the phone call I expected, but wasn't prepared for. It was my father. "Lily Rose," he said. No greeting, no "how are you," just that cold, authoritative tone. "I know what you're doing. I know who you've been talking to. You think you're being a hero? You're being a traitor. You're biting the hand that gave you everything." "That hand pushed me out into the street, Dad," I replied, my voice surprisingly calm. "And it wasn't you who gave me everything. It was the people Sarah robbed. You just provided the vault for the stolen goods." "Drop this now," he hissed. "I will give you $1 million. I will buy you a house anywhere in the world. You can have your life back. Just tell your friends to go home and tell that reporter it was all a misunderstanding." $1 million? I let out a dry, sharp laugh. "Is that the price of your soul, or Sarah's? Because my integrity costs a lot more than that. I don't want your money, Dad. I want the truth on the front page." He hung up. That was the final bridge burning. The next morning, the headline didn't just break, it exploded. "The Golden Thorns, Inside the Rose Foundation's multi-million-dollar fraud." The article featured my face, but more importantly, it featured the testimonies of the 5. It detailed the threats, the stolen pensions, and the systematic abuse of power. By noon, the foundation's headquarters were swarmed by protesters and news vans. By 2:00 p.m., the federal investigators were at the gates of our estate. I watched it all from a small television in the diner where I used to work. I saw Sarah being led out in handcuffs, trying to hide her face behind her designer handbag. I saw my father standing on the porch, looking suddenly very old and very small, as agents carried boxes of files out of his home. But the story wasn't over. My father was a cornered animal, and cornered animals are the most dangerous. He had one last card to play, and he intended to use it to ruin me before the trial even began. The retaliation was swift and surgical. My father didn't go for my throat with a knife, he went for my character with a scalpel. Within 24 hours of the arrests, a smear campaign began to circulate online. Old photos of me from college were cropped and taken out of context to make me look like an unstable party girl. Financial records, conveniently doctored, were leaked to suggest that I was the one who had actually embezzled the money and was now framing my sister out of jealousy. "He's trying to turn the public against you," Elias, the journalist, warned me over the phone. "He's painting you as the villain who couldn't handle being the lesser sister. People love a fall from grace, Lily. They're starting to buy it." I felt the walls closing in. The diner where I worked was suddenly surrounded by paparazzi. My landlord told me I had to leave because the drama was disturbing the other tenants. I was being squeezed out of my life all over again. But my father made one fatal mistake. He assumed that by attacking me, he would scare off the others. He thought that if the leader fell, the army would scatter. He couldn't have been more wrong. The next evening, while I was sitting in my car, wondering where I would sleep that night, a notification popped up on my screen. It was a live stream. It wasn't me speaking. It was Marcus, the elderly donor Sarah had scammed. He was standing in front of the federal courthouse, flanked by Elena and the other 3 women. "They are lying about Lily Rose," Marcus said into a dozen microphones, his voice cracking with age, but firm with conviction. "She didn't come to us for money. She didn't come to us for fame. She came to us because she was the only one brave enough to lose everything to tell the truth. We aren't just 5 witnesses anymore. We've heard from 10 more today, then 20. Behind him, people started holding up signs. They weren't just protesting the foundation anymore. They were supporting the whistleblower Rose. The more my father tried to bury me, the more people dug for the truth. The federal investigators found the hush money accounts my father had used to fund the smear campaign. It was the smoking gun. It proved that he wasn't just a negligent father. He was an active co-conspirator in the cover-up. 2 weeks before the trial was set to begin, I received a frantic message from an old family friend. My father wanted to see me. One last time. No lawyers, no cameras, just us. I went back to that mansion. The gates were rusted now, the gardens overgrown. The Rose prestige had withered. I found him in the same study where he had disowned me. But the smell of expensive cigars was gone, replaced by the stagnant scent of a house that was dying. "You won," he said without looking at me. He looked frail, his skin hanging off his bones like wet paper. "I didn't want to win, Dad," I said, standing in the same spot I stood 2 years ago. "I just wanted you to be a father instead of a CEO." He finally looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw fear in his eyes. Not fear of jail, but fear of being forgotten. "They're taking everything, Lily. The house, the accounts, the name. There will be nothing left for you." "I already have nothing from you," I replied, "and I've never felt richer." As I walked out, he called out my name. "Lily, if you testify, Sarah will go away for a long time. Is that what you want? To destroy your sister?" I paused at the door, my hand on the cold brass handle. "Sarah destroyed herself. I'm just the one testifying at the funeral of her lies." I left the house without looking back. The trial was only days away, and I knew that the biggest revelation was yet to come. Something even Elias didn't know yet. Something that would change the trajectory of the entire Rose legacy forever. The morning of the trial felt like a funeral for a life I no longer recognized. The courthouse steps were a sea of flashing lights and shouting voices. But as I walked through the doors, everything went silent. Inside that marble hall, the Rose name didn't mean power anymore. It was just a case number on a docket. I took the stand, my eyes locked onto the back of the room. Sarah sat there, her expensive suit looking like armor that had finally cracked. My father sat behind her, staring at his hands. "Miss Rose," the prosecutor began, "you claim your sister didn't act alone, but the records show she was the sole director. Why are you insisting there is a deeper layer?" I looked at my father. This was the secret I had held back, the one piece of evidence I hadn't even shown Elias. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small worn-out diary. It wasn't Sarah's, it was my mother's. My mother didn't die of a broken heart or a long illness like the public was told, I said, my voice echoing through the courtroom. She died because she found out 30 years ago what this foundation was really doing. This isn't a recent fraud. This is a family tradition. I read the entries. My mother had documented the first donations that were diverted to offshore accounts in the 80s. She had written about my father's threats to take us away if she ever went to the police. The 5 were just the latest victims in a cycle that had been spinning since before I was born. The courtroom was so quiet, you could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Sarah looked at our father, her face turning pale. She realized then that she wasn't the mastermind. She was just a pawn he had trained to take the fall when the walls eventually closed in. The verdict was a foregone conclusion. Sarah was sentenced to 10 years for fraud and embezzlement. My father, facing racketeering and witness tampering charges, was stripped of every asset he owned. The Rose Foundation was liquidated and every cent recovered was funneled back to the victims, starting with Marcus and the women who had stood by me. After the sentencing, I stood on the sidewalk, watching as the black transport van took my sister away. My father was led out in a separate car. He didn't look at me this time. He couldn't. Elias walked up to me, tucking his notepad into his jacket. So what now? Lily Rose, the woman who took down a dynasty. You're the most famous person in the country right now. You could write a book, do a movie, you could have it all back. I looked at the sunset reflecting off the glass buildings. I don't want it all back, Elias. I want to go somewhere where nobody knows my last name. I want to start a life that isn't built on a foundation of secrets. I sold the few items I had left from the estate and moved to a small town by the coast. I don't work in high-rise offices or attend galas. I spend my mornings by the water and my evenings writing. The name Lily Rose is still in the headlines sometimes, but usually as a footnote in a cautionary tale about greed. I lost a father, a sister, and a fortune. But when I look in the mirror now, I don't see a bitter daughter or a socialite. I see a woman who is finally, for the first time in her life, at peace. Because the truth doesn't just set you free, it gives you a clean slate. Please tell me in the comments from which city or country and at what time you are watching this video. If you had to choose between your family's loyalty and the absolute truth, which one would you sacrifice? This was a story of courage and the high price of integrity. If this moved you, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join the LilyCalmStories family for more deep, moving narratives.